Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one of a series of videos that I'm doing on combat in video games, which is part of a larger suite of videos I'm doing on game design. And in this one, I'm going to particularly focus in on some common combat mechanics. You are probably an avid game player if you're watching this, so you will probably recognize these common approaches quite quickly. So I don't want to spend a long time explaining them in detail. I just want to kind of enumerate them and move on. But the point is to draw your attention to the fact that there are some common tropes. Again, I don't think that this is necessarily an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that I particularly want to present to you. So here we go. So combat mode is the idea that within the game you have a status of being in combat and a status of not being in combat, and there may be things that you can do only in combat, and there are things you can do you're not able to do in combat. And a fairly typical one for an RPG would be you can't eat while you're in combat in Minecraft. It's not quite the same. You can't sleep if there are enemies nearby, and it detects that. So it's a similar kind of thing. Um, the most simple kind of combat that I can think of in that I've come across in games is the one-hit kill. So I've got a picture of one of the Mario 2D platforming games. I can't remember exactly which one this is, and he's jumping on a mushroom, which will kill the mushroom. But if the mushroom had touched him, it would kill him. So it's yeah, one-hit kill. More games, if you haven't got the one hit kill, many games use the concept of hit points or health or something, which is some kind of numbered resource in which, as you receive damage, these are reduced, and there are ways in the rest of the game to restore them. And when you get down to zero, you die. Or if your enemy gets down to zero, you die, or you knock out, or become unconscious, or whatever your concept of defeat is that you have in your game. Here's one that comes from dice rolling RPGs originally, which is the concept of to hit and damage rolls. And the word roll tends to mean a random number has been generated and there is a random chance, a determined amount of random chance of whether something happens or doesn't happen. And in this paradigm, which is a very common paradigm for RPG games in particular, there are two such roles involved, and these come from the actual mechanics from Dungeons and Dragons, for example. So the first is that you determine whether or not an attack hits. And as you can see on the screenshot that I've got here, there's a whole lot of attacks going on. There's some numbers giving you how much damage is happening, but it says miss several times. And so there's actually quite a lot of missing going on in this picture. And then when you actually do connect, you have a separate calculation, sometimes, not always with randomness involved, but often with some random elements involved as well as to how much damage is being dealt. And that's that's a very common basis of combat calculations. There are other ways to approach this, or to combine with this as well, even. So hitboxes, this is Skyrim, and you know you're going to hit as long as the enemy doesn't parry or block. If you're going to manage to strike within what's called their hitboxes, so it's a physical area inside the game in which if you manage to get your weapon attack to land inside it, it will do damage to the thing that you're attacking. So rather than having a randomized roll, this is down to player skill to make sure that this is happening. And similarly for ranged combats, you might have a hitbox as well. You'll target the enemy, but the arrow has to make its way into that hitbox in order for the enemy to be damaged. Sometimes with weapons, you have fixed damage weapons. I've said fixed damage guns here, and it's particularly common with guns where you get a damage um, number for a particular gun. And in this game, we've got details of a gun here, and it says damage 452. Now that might be altered by various other calculations that are going on inside the game. There might be armor involved that reduce the amount of damage, but that is an attack, a successful attack with this gun does that much damage. Um, Blocking and parrying, I kind of mentioned them earlier, are ways in melee combat of thwarting the attack from an enemy or of an enemy managing to thwart or reduce the damage coming in from an attack. And the difference between the two is that this is showing a block here where the person who's being attacked actually manages to physically use their strength to stop the incoming weapon. And a parry is a more subtle kind of thing, which is where you use dexterity to turn their strike aside. So it's the sort of thing you see more in fencing or sword play is a parry where if somebody's trying to strike towards you, you use your sword to deflect it. Uh, okay, uh, particularly in beat 'em ups, but in some other games as well, you've got the concept of light and heavy attacks comes in, and so this is the idea that there are two kinds of attacks you can have. Why would you not always do a heavy attack? Because it does more damage than a light attack, but it takes longer, and there may be other risk involved. It may open you up to fast attacks from your enemy. So you need to work out the timing of when to use your light and heavy attacks and in what kind of combination you're going to use them. And talking about combinations, this is an element in some combat. Either the concept of a combo when you manage to chain together several attacks and you get a super special attack afterwards, or as a result of chaining together uh, controls, which is almost the same thing but slightly different. But it's the concept of the special attack that you manage to build up by having a combination of other attacks hit. Turn-based combat is a whole thing in its own right. It's particularly prevalent in the genre called JRPG, Japanese RPGs. This is one of the Mario paper games which use turn-based combat, and it's a much slower approach to combat, or can be, in the sense that the player gets to think about things before, whilst they're making decisions. And it's similar in a lot of ways, again, to the pen and paper kind of combat where you've got uh, enemies taking turns and players taking turns to attack. It's in many ways highly unrealistic, but it is a kind of thing which happens in games and has a particular feel of its own. Target locking. So the ability to say, I am targeted on this particular enemy. This is from one of the Zelda games, which do it very explicitly. And when you try and move when you're in target lock, then you actually rotate around the enemy, which is quite a nice idea. And if you have target locking, then you might also have the ability to switch target to give the player the ability to change the focus of which particular enemy they're targeting. And this, in the Zelda games, the target locking means that you never have the situation where your target that you're locked onto is behind you. So you don't need to be facing in the right direction because the game takes care of that. But what you do need to do is be close enough to have your attack land if you're using melee attacks. Headshots, particularly for shooters, is the concept that you can do more damage if you hit in a particular place, which is usually the head. So a more accurate shot will give you the headshots. At this point, I'm always reminded of the Fallout VAT system. See a later video for that. I'm going to talk about that as a specific example of body part targeting. Um, There's a concept in beat 'em ups, which is the high, mid, low idea, which is where you add complexity to your combat, so it's not just an attack. This is a repeating GIF, obviously. Um, but so this is a kick, but it's a kind of low attack. But when you block or parry, you need to be doing so reading where your opponent is attacking and vice versa, and where they're vulnerable to, and it adds an element of tactics to an otherwise quite simple combat system. And this kind of brings us to the rock paper scissors concept, which is I've not got a specific game here, uh, although yeah, the Total War games use this quite well. The concept of some things that are strong against other things and some things that are weak against other things. So this particular example that I've got a picture from, you've got attacks, throws, and blocks as a rock paper scissors. It doesn't have to be three things. There can be more. It can be in a kind of chain. You can have a kind of rock paper scissors lizard Spock if you want. Um, and in games that involve like RPGs that involve element based magic, then you often get these kind of things. The Pokemon games did it quite well with having different types of Pokemon and different types of damage and attack. And some Pokemon were weak against certain types and strong against other types. And so um, this tends to add an element of tactical choice, which we talked about in the previous video. But it's quite a common trope to think about when designing combat systems. So that's been a quick run through some of the common tactics that can be used for combat. What are you going to use? If you're designing combat for a game, well, you need something that suits the particular game that you've got. You may use more than one of these things. Obviously, some of them can be used in combination. There's all sorts of other things that you can throw in as well. But that's a little bit of a resource for you. Anyway, I shall stop talking now. That's it from me for now.